This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
But that's how you parent. You don't expect results. You can't, that's not what a parent is. You can't ever expect results or gratitude. That's not what a parent does. You just do what you do every day.
Welcome to Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan. I'm Dr. Dan. This show is about making the world a more loving, accepting, and compassionate place, one parent, one person, and one child at a time. The key to raising healthy and engaged kids is for parents to seek the same in their own lives while striving to be the best versions of themselves each day, no matter who you are or where you came from. With increased awareness, you can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint for your children, your family, and all those you care about, while living your own life to the fullest. Today's show is The Evening Hero, Parenting, Autism, Immigration, and Family Legacy, with our guest, Marie Myung-Ok Lee. Marie is an acclaimed Korean-American writer and author of several novels, including Somebody's Daughter. Her newest novel, The Evening Hero, which we'll be talking about today, is on the future of medicine, immigration, and North Korea. She graduated from Brown University and was a writer in residence there before she began teaching at Columbia University's writing division. Her stories and essays have been published in The Atlantic, The New York Times, Slate, Salon, Guernica, The Guardian, and many, many more. She was the first Fulbright Scholar to Korea in creative writing and has received many honors for her work, including an O. Henry Honorable Mention, the Best Book Award from the Friends of American Writers, and a Rhode Island State Council on the Arts Fiction Fellowship, and also is a New York Foundation for the Arts Fiction Fellow. Marie is founder of the Asian American Writers Workshop and was an R-Word writer in residence for the Columbia MFA program. Marie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. I'm so excited to be here.
We have so much to talk about today, from parenting to your experience growing up to your latest novel. And I was going back and forth the where to start. And so I decided that let's start with your parenting journey, because there's so much wonderful experience to unpack for our audience. And then we will work our way from there. So tell everyone about this parenting journey that you have been on for several years.
So it started with me actually not wanting to be a parent at all. I had this idea that I just wanted to be a writer. I grew up in rural Minnesota, and I had these ideas that I was going to live in a garret with my cat. And I was pretty set on that vision for myself. And I met someone in college, and we dated on and off for many years. And when you have very big disagreements on if you want to have kids or not, so we didn't get married. And then I decided, actually, it was actually more important for me to be with this person, and that we kind of had to compromise. We would have a child and then kind of see how it went. And so I was kind of, I don't even know how to describe, I never played with dolls. My dad wanted me to be a doctor, so I had a visible man and a visible woman, and I could almost take blood and do all this stuff. But babysitting was just not something that interested me. I was really reading a lot of Simone de Beauvoir at the time. And so I became a parent later in life. I waited until I was 35, 36, and then, had my baby. And almost immediately, everything just kind of went off the rails in terms of, oh, this is how your child is like. Besides having, I had a really difficult birth with him. And then he was always kind of colicky, didn't feel well. He was a really difficult baby. And then when he was, I don't know, he walked early. So when he was about 12 months old, he started having this kind of funny hitch to his gait. And it was something only I noticed. In fact, my mother was with us, and she's the most paranoid person in our family. And she just kept telling me, I don't know, he's just a toddler. He's kind of stumbling. It's not a big deal. And actually, I got worried enough when we were on vacation that I called the pediatrician, on the helpline, and they were just like, "Oh, shut up, lady! It's first time mom. It's not a problem." Blah blah blah. But I was so paranoid, I kept calling back until I got the older man who was the owner of the practice, and he actually said, "Oh, that sounds kind of weird." So we had to drive him all the way back in, and that was the first time when I kind of went against the grain of what everyone was telling me. And it turned, he saw my son walking and said, "You need to get to the emergency room immediately." And my poor son went through all these tests for days and days and days. They didn't know what was wrong with him, but he kept getting worse and worse and worse. And it turned out he had a spinal cord cancer that was growing in his spinal cord, that was growing so rapidly that if I would have waited probably another 2 days, they said it might have permanently caused paralysis.
Wow.
Which unfortunately set me a little bit on a path of crisis mode for anything that I didn't know what was going on. And I didn't, and again, all I had was what to expect while you were expecting, you know, and I feel like child raising is so different than when we were kids, because our parents just kind of let us do anything. And, the neighbor would just be like, "No, just do it like this and clean up the vomit." Do you know what I'm saying? Where it's so much more atomized here. I was living in Providence. I was just feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing. And, and people were yelling at me for putting him in daycare, but I was like, I'm working. And, I just kind of felt I was always ping ponging around, like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so I was so willing often to just give up to the judgment of others.
Right. Foreshadowing what Marie said was going against the grain of others, because at some point you're going to be telling us how you have a parenting lifetime of going against the grain and being cutting edge. So I'm going to leave that hanging out there for our listeners.
Okay.
Keep going. Yes. Keep going.
It's just like when you tell a story in a novel. It's like information control.
Yes, you inspired me. You inspired me in your novel.
Great.
Yes.
Well, so we treated the cancer and thought it was fine. But then for some reason, it's very funny how, my father's a physician. I thought I was going to be a physician. And this was the first time also I realized that medicine is somewhat of an inexact science. A lot of it has to do with guessing and some mysticism involved, really. Because then a bunch of other people said, "You know what? I really don't feel very good about this tumor. I think we should go back in and do more stuff with it." So it was so severe that our son had to be in what's called a spica cast. They had to fuse 3 of the vertebrae together because they ended up trying to dig out the entire tumor, which was still encapsulated but could possibly become malignant. So he's in this body cast for a year. Also during the time when I was vaguely aware from what to expect, that's the time when kids are crawling around or doing things. And he was in his full body wheelchair, and I was taking care of him. And then also he seemed like he had these gut problems that we didn't. Well, so here I'm saying he has 12 diarrheas a day. Is that normal? And doctors are just so busy with everything else that also the gut thing was not their wheelhouse when they're trying to deal with tumors. They're just like, "It's fine, lady. Here, da-da-da." And, so after he got out of the cast, he started having really bad behavioral problems. And at that point, they were just like, "Oh, well, cancer seems like it's okay." And, they had to do MRIs every year to make sure it was gone. But then everyone's like, "I don't know why he's acting so weird." And then he used to be really precocious. He lost all his words. So they didn't really know what was happening, except that when he was 3, he was diagnosed with autism. Even though it wasn't, I don't even know what to say. He was just very engaging and very precocious earlier. So just this whole idea of this regression was very puzzling to me. And when he was 3, it was the first time at this point, he was so violent. He was constantly banging his head either on me, or we had a cast iron bathtub and he would bang his head against it. And, we would bring him into all these doctors and they would all say, this is an autistic behavior. He should probably be institutionalized like at Bradley. And that's what we do. And there's all these drugs that we can use to treat it. And then for me, that was the first time, well, now the second time maybe, where I started going like, you know what? I don't feel like that's right, even though I'm the mom and, and then
they're the quote experts, right?
Exactly.
And it's that fight between your own motherly instinct and what you're being told.
Exactly. So the one advantage that I had is being at Brown at the time, I could go look at the New England Journal of Medicine. And for instance, one of the drugs that they had suggested was a drug called risperidol. That's an antipsychotic. And I looked up the study. I'm trained in economics, so I'm very good with statistics. It wasn't too tough for me to see that the study that they had was very short. It was the sample size was very small. They didn't extend it past 6 months, so it was impossible to see if there were long-term side effects and so forth. And most importantly, it appeared that the effects of whatever calming, what they call it, of autistic irritation did not last.
Right. So,
and at the same time, he's still having this diarrhea. But then everyone's telling me, well, a lot of kids with autism have digestive problems. But I kind of feeling like, again, he just was suffering. You could it was so clear to me he was suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to MGH and actually found a doctor who was credulous and who gave him an endoscopy. And then he found out that our son had ulcerative colitis and he had something called eosinophilic gastroenteritis. It's like autoimmune. It's, white blood cell mediated. But it's funny how even when we went back to our primary care physician, she was still, why did you do that to your kid? Like, that's ridiculous. And now I'm in this trope of parents with autism think that, they can give their kids bleach and this and that. And she literally said, why don't you save your money for something that really works, like camp? Huh. So I'm getting all this, again, you're an incompetent mother and I'm already feeling completely incompetent. But as soon as they put him on anti-inflammatory drugs, he stopped banging his head.
Wow.
So you can see where I'm kind of, okay, so now I'm feeling actually slightly more confident about this. And then eventually, unfortunately with allopathic drugs, as you probably know, that they often can have refractory, like causing symptoms that, because then I could tell from when he was like clutching his stomach that I saw on the side effects panel that stomach pain was a possible side effect and that it was also clearly losing its effect. He just became way more violent than ever when he was about 8 or 9. Yeah. After kind of a couple, good years of special needs parenting, I guess. Mm-hmm. So at that point too, he was just getting kicked out of all his schools. And then we were again at the end of our rope, and then I will mention, he's not, when people think of autism, they often think of Rain Man or people who are neurotypical, but they just can't communicate well. Our son was at the time diagnosed as mentally retarded, cognitively delayed. I think they were guessing his IQ was probably around 70. He didn't really have any words. He did not have any functional language. So you couldn't ask him, does this hurt? Does that hurt? Couldn't answer yes or no questions. Couldn't answer any of the WH questions. And everything he did was generally sort of unexplainable. He had terrible pica. He was constantly eating his clothes. Yeah. All this stuff was happening all at once. And then when his school kicked him out, I'm looking at these other schools in Providence where they're using restraint boards. We got referred to a school in Massachusetts where they use electric shocks. And I just thought, what I mean? To get referred to that?
That's
nuts. What I mean? And, being a citizen of the world, knowing that's against the Geneva Conventions, yet being referred to something like that. So that also drove me to think, okay, what is like the least harmful thing that I can do for which he can't communicate? Yeah. And then by that time, risperidol actually, I believe, and some other drug they were suggesting had black box warnings. Right. And as you know, as a doctor, black box warnings means it's the most dangerous drugs. They've had child deaths from these bipolar drugs that they have been actually pushing on kids who are like 2 years old. Or like, how can you say 2-year-olds are bipolar? That's what 2-year-olds are.
Yeah.
So by then I was starting to get a little, some of this has to do less with, me being a parent. I think me also being a writer means you have to digest enormous amounts of information.
Oh,
In
and
order
you're a
to
researcher. It's that
correct.
combination of researcher writer.
Exactly. So I do some science writing as well as you've seen, my novel is also very research forward, and it's
Yes.
about medicine, and it's probably that emotionally is coming from some of that part.
Mm-hmm.
So I was reading Michael Pollan's book because at the time we were trying to get our son to try to ride a bike, with training wheels. And the school literally said to me, he does not have the executive functioning for that because it's too many steps. Like he can't do any of that. And it's just going to be stupid for you to even try. So when I hear things like that, I tend to get very revved up. And then Michael Pollan's book had one, it was The Botany of Desire. It had one line that super struck me, and it said, cannabis slows short-term memory formation. And, so for the pot user, it's, whoa, let me stare at this. It's so cool, man. Lava lamp.
Yeah.
But I could tell from our son that he had so much stimuli going on. So, when he would be faced with the bike, you could see he wished to ride upon the bike, and he would throw the bike instead and attack me. And to me, that was not an autistic behavior. To me, the behavior was an expression of, I want to do this and I can't, and something's stopping me. So then I thought, okay, why not cannabis? And this was in 2008 when nobody was using it in a pediatric setting. There was very little evidence, whether it was good or bad.
Yeah.
Luckily, Jason had a very credulous neurologist, Dr. Gaetanis, he was at the Brown Hospital. So we had a little bit of a peer relationship, because he would be the guy where I'd be like, are you sure Jason doesn't have it, like a cherry malformation? And he'd go back and look at all his MRIs. We had this very lovely back and forth. So, I'm not completely dumping on the medical profession to have someone like that who would sit with me and do all this. So when I suggested cannabis, and then I also showed him all the anti-tumoral properties, he was very reluctant, and I can see for many reasons why that would be. Even Jason's integrative physician said, don't try it. It's awful. Like, don't even go there. And now I'm seeing more. It was probably a liability issue. So Dr. Gaetanis was awesome. He made us try a trial of Marinol, which is a synthetic cannabis, which had very weird effects. But my mother-in-law had cancer, so I was kind of prepared for the fact that synthetics aren't as good. And so to make a long story short, in 2008, the medical marijuana community was not anything like it is today. You can't go to a store.
Right. Much different.
It was right. And I'm not going to go on the street and buy something. So finally, it was more through, luckily, Providence is small enough that I was able to kind of creep around. And one of the heads of the groups, the patient groups, was able to connect me with a grower. And so this grower slowly brought over different cannabis that we tried for over a year.
Yeah, a chemist. And then I just want to say, fast forward for folks, then later you were writing an op-ed piece in the Washington Post, published, titled, "I Made My Son Cannabis Cookies. They Changed His Life." And then later, you're on CNN with Dr. Sanjay Gupta on autism and marijuana. You're at the forefront of this new experimental, shall we say, use of cannabis. And then your son becomes the youngest person I know in Rhode Island, let alone the country, to get a
I think in the country,
to get a medical marijuana card.
Yes. And I will say also at the time, so once we found the right dose, it's not about giving your child cannabis. It's always hard for me to explain, because at one point, Dr. Gaetanis wanted me to help another family whose child was on so many medications that he was actually bleeding out of his eyes from the intracranial pressure. Wow. But this person, despite how motivated she was, when I showed her all my notebooks, the Excel spreadsheets, I understand, this is not something that she felt that she could do. So it took us a year feeling like it wasn't working, actually. He'd get couch lock, he'd get more aggressive. It's and, there's also different formulations. There's other constituents in cannabis, like terpenes. Terpenes are what makes, the herb thyme smell timey. So we didn't really know what it was. And then the last strain that we were going to try was one that the grower said he used for his Huntington's patients and for cancer patients. And it's incredibly strong because you can imagine like for cancer pain. And the only thing we could do is I would test the stuff myself, and I must have a fairly balanced endocannabinoid system because even no matter how small, how much I could titrate it, it would just knock me out. But it just made me feel a little better, just making sure it was pure, or I don't know.
Yeah.
So that last one was so strong. If there's any residue on a utensil and I use utensil, I would just go wacky.
Yeah.
But for our son, it was very strange. It just leveled him up. It was very strange. He did not act high. He just was free of his pain for just a couple hours. But it was enough that not only was the pain alleviated, but a lot of his gut problems, the diarrhea, where he was just like having this failure to thrive. And then he learned how to ride a bike, which took a while, but I was able to show his teachers, showing him riding a bike. So with that's why I felt like I had to write about it publicly, because that seemed like, with all these kids being on all these different drugs, and you may or may not have seen, there's been a bunch of lawsuits because of gynecomastia, or when boys will lactate, it's caused permanent diabetes and certain things. So this idea that you could try cannabis and it won't kill you was something that I felt like I had to get out. And I will also mention Dr. Gupta. So when I did the first series of articles in Slate, all the media was just at the door. In fact, Brown had to shut down their phone system because so many calls were coming in. And I had this feeling a lot of it was they were just dying to be like, oh, professor drugs her kid because, hippy dippy professor, because you can't parent, or, I could kind of, and then the other thing was obviously because it was so federally illegal, it was quite
right. Hot
precarious.
Topic. Yes.
And Dr. Gupta was probably the most credulous person, but he, I will mention, was also against medical marijuana at the time too. So I had that in the back of my mind. So it was actually pretty wonderful 10 years later to be okay. And also the laws have changed. Jason's 22. He is legally on the state level able to access cannabis. So it was kind of a fun way to, okay, now I can talk to you about this.
Wow. A message to, first of all, internal and maternal strength, because in so many ways you pushed through and you just didn't listen to what didn't feel right to you. And we know that medicine is imperfect. The medical field, the psychological field, everyone does their best with their training and with the system with one's working in. This is not an excuse, it's an explanation. And it is so important for parents to listen to themselves when something does not feel right. And the other thing I want to point out is that there were several parts of your story, your journey, where your son's symptoms and behaviors were attributed to the autism diagnosis, right? Like it's easily just, headbanging, autism. Aggressive, autism. But he had other medical issues that was causing discomfort and pain. And since he could not communicate, that's how people communicate when they can't communicate. And so there's so many complexities to the autism spectrum. And fortunately, in medicine, we are moving towards integrative and holistic ways of looking at healing and wellness. And I just want to say, it takes so much courage for you to speak out. It probably doesn't feel that way because you did what you had to do, but it does take a lot of courage to speak out.
Thank you. But you're right. I think a lot of it was me thinking about, if I was in intractable pain and no one was helping me, what would I do? I would probably bite mommy.
Yes. So we have a lot to talk about in terms of your work and your 18 years of research for your latest novel. Before, I want to close this portion off with telling everyone, if you could just list, there's a lot of people listening to this who have kids with who are on the autism spectrum. What have been the positive benefits of cannabis for your son?
The first one was alleviating the gut pain. And then that actually stopped the pica.
Mm-hmm.
And that
For
also
everyone,
stops.
everyone,
Yes.
pica is eating non-food. So you're eating
Yes.
clothes, dirt, objects. It's non-food eating. Yep.
Which again seemed, wow, what a weird autistic behavior, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to his stomach hurts, so he's putting something in it. And apparently, one of the other things historically is when people had stomach pain, they would actually eat fabric, and that's what he was doing. So it's really, really interesting. So it also, anxiety is one of his major problems. It helped his anxiety quite a bit. It helped his sleep. Um, and then just overall, I guess they're finding, like the CBD craze, but we have these amazing pictures of him when he's 7, 8, 9. He's very pallid. His teeth look ginormous because his face is so shrunken. He's not smiling. And it wasn't until later, after he learned how to ride a bike, he's very robust. Then my husband and I were going to each other. We haven't seen him smile. That's why he looks so strange to us. And now he went from being so undersized. We were actually having problems with one of his schools. They were kind of on the cusp of calling social services because they felt that we were starving him. And part of that also had to do with ABA. They use things like Skittles with applied behavioral analysis. It's kind of where they give kids a reward for, the proper behavior. They were using Skittles and Cheetos and things. And I had him on a gluten-free diet for his gut and so forth. So there was also that idea that I was the parent who was so paranoid. I wouldn't let my kid eat Skittles. I was so mean in it. And actually I was criticized by his pediatrician, whom I switched from, for not giving him milk. He's clearly has issues with casein. And I'm kind of feeling like, hello, look, I'm Asian. Did you know more people do not drink milk than do? And so I just felt like that was so simplistic, this idea, well, how's he going to get calcium? And I was sort of like, well, the calcium magnesium ratio, it's not necessarily the best, like how do cows get calcium? So the gut thing, probably healing his gut was probably something that just kind of like fixed so many things, because now it's so fun to see, because we've had to go to the doctor so much. He went from being way below the growth chart to he's being slightly above. And this is despite the fact that the fusion has made him 1 to 2 inches shorter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the fact, he's so completely robust. And so with his new pediatrician here in New York, she just said, I don't care what you're doing, just keep doing it, because this is pretty amazing how far he's come. So
Wow. So we have he's growing, he's able to eat, his gut issues have drastically improved, which has of course affects everything. You're seeing smiles. I had read he was able, with his anxiety, to tolerate like doctor visits and other anxiety provoking situations that he wasn't previously able to tolerate. And more even recently, he has more words. He's speaking more, I've heard.
He's speaking more. And I think I would like to back up a little bit more too and mention that, for instance, so this has less to do with cannabis, but more in terms of autism. When one problem he's always had is, when you're 18 months old and you're getting spinal tap and all these things and no one's explaining what's happening to you and you're screaming no. That's when he sold language. You're screaming no. Your parents are holding you down. He has like a phobia about needles. And then as he got older, it became much more brutal, where there would be 4 big nurses descending on him and forcing him. And then he gets so upset that his veins would pop and they'd get too much carbon dioxide, and then they'd have to do it again. And so finally, I just said, we can't do it like this anymore. And they're just kind of like, lady, what else are we going to do? And everyone was super impatient. And then also with COVID, we're like, how are we going to get him vaccinated? Because just looking at a needle would make him flip out. So then I just finally felt like, you know what? This is Jason. This is the medical establishment. The medical establishment is not meant for Jason. But why should Jason have to contort himself to this system? So I guess I'm getting better at being not sneaky, but just finding alternate ways to DIY. A good friend of mine, who I will not name, works a lot with hemophiliacs. Mm-hmm. And I said, hey, can you get me like a phlebotomy kit so I can practice? And then I want to be able to do this to my son in the comfort of our own home, and just have him relax, because I know if I can just do it once and he's relaxed, he'll realize it actually hurts a lot less if you just sit there. I know this for a fact.
And this is exposure therapy, everyone. This is
right.
classic behavioral therapy, right? Yes.
I appreciate the clinical name for it, because it seems so obvious. So here's mom going, okay. So, and then this friend of mine said, hey, you can get this weirdo arm, because I was signing up for the Big Apple phlebotomy school, but it was very funny. It's like, then I had to take an EKG class too. It's like, I don't need that. Just show me the phlebotomy. So phlebotomist friend showed me how to do it. It's not, you can't get an air embolism because you're just drawing out. So it's not quite as precarious as you would think. It's just more the pain.
Yep.
So I actually got an arm that bleeds. So I practiced on my friend, who was quite amazing, because I know it must have hurt. I practiced on myself a couple times. And then I practiced on his arm.
You are a pioneer. Yeah.
Well, my friend told me those Terumo needles are the best. My phlebotomist friend is actually switching, because she said she's never seen something so sharp.
Wow.
So our son recently got his blood taken, took pictures. He didn't move. I got a bunch of diabetic needles that are so small. I chased him around the house for a couple hours. I said, Jay, it doesn't hurt. Look, mommy, look. And I gave myself shots. Yeah. He sat there and he's like, oh, actually, it doesn't hurt. So, I signed up for the dumb special needs thing in New York, and they never called us back for months, where someone was supposed to come to the house. So I was like, okay, it's Pioneer Lady urban style.
Yes, they did you a favor.
Yeah, you're right. Right?
Yeah, the universe spoke to you. The universe spoke to you.
We went to Dwayne Reed. So
wow.
Yes, we went to the local drugstore.
Yeah.
But he's a pro.
Yeah.
He's a pro now. He got his booster.
That's awesome. And I did see one of the more recent pictures and videos of a handsome young man who holding your hand. You guys were walking somewhere, and I saw a smile. I saw that smile. I saw that smile on his face. And so, gosh, what a journey, which I know, as all of us parents, like, it never ends, particularly for parents with special needs kids. It does keep going. And but these chapters keep changing, right? This growth and the development and the celebration and milestones are just amazing. So thank you for sharing that with our listeners. So you guys, when you hear about the pioneer with cannabis and autism, you're listening to her right now.
Can you feel it in the air? That sudden shift of mood? It's the perfect time to shed the winter blues and experience the revitalizing qualities of driving a Lincoln. It starts with the Lincoln Spring Sales Event. So step outside and visit your local Lincoln retailer or Lincoln.com for some seriously mood-enhancing offers on current and past Lincoln models. Your transformation awaits. Learn more at Lincoln.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Commercial Insurance. Business owners, meet Progressive Insurance. They make it easy to get discounts on commercial auto insurance and find coverages to grow with your business. Quote in as little as 6 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company. Coverage provided and serviced by affiliated and third-party insurers. Discounts and coverage selections not available in all states or situations.
Are you a forward thinker? Then you need an HR and finance platform that thinks like you do. Workday is the AI platform that helps propel your organization, your workforce, and your industry into the future. Workday, moving business forever forward.
All right, we need to transition. I've been steeped in your latest novel. You are a voice for the Korean American experience, which runs through your novels. And this latest one, 18 years. 18 years
yes.
of research. So tell us about this and set the stage for everyone.
Okay. And I know this is a podcast, but I got to show you the blingy cover.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's so blingy.
I got mine right here.
Oh,
it's beautiful.
Nice.
Yeah,
okay.
We're both holding our books. They're beautiful. Mine's paperback. Right. Yours is beautifully hardback, though.
But yeah, when you get the hardback, it's very blingy.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's beautiful.
Well, we were bringing Jason, to actually, like, this is going to be the list of every alternative treatment you could possibly do, because of his fusion, he was starting to get kyphosis, for which they said we might have to do back surgery, for which I was like, no.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually took him to someone who does craniosacral therapy, which sounds very hippie-ish, but it's kind of aligning the vertebrae. And it's about cerebrospinal fluid. So it actually helped him with some of his sensory issues and so forth. So we're at one of these sessions, and the doctor said, I don't know, he was just very chatty that day. And he's telling me about a case that he knew of an OBGYN who had done a wonderful job with a woman who had placenta accreta. So placenta accreta is basically when your placenta like grows over the opening to the uterus. And then, so when you have the baby, it bursts and the placenta becomes like a fire hose and you may die. And often people die. And often people will bleed out in the ambulance before they get to the hospital. It's a very serious problem. But this guy was such a good surgeon. He managed to get the baby out fine, and he managed to stop the bleeding by doing a hysterectomy. So everything seems great. However, the patient later sued him for loss of fertility. And being that this was her first baby, she was in her 20s, And so our doctor friend said, this doctor lost his case. And he ended up stopping practicing medicine and so forth. And so from that little snippet, I thought, you know what? What if the doctor was Asian and they use these like tropes like the Asian butcher or Asians don't care about life and so forth, especially because the doctor trope is so somewhat fraught. Again, I was telling you, the doctor is really revered in Korea.
Yes.
You know, whenever I was sick, my mom would make us dress up to go to the doctor. I'd be like, oh, I'm going to barf. I have to get dressed up. It's so the idea of somebody having gone to Harvard Medical School and then finding themselves in this situation, doing their best. And then also Middlemarch is one of my favorite novels. I don't know if you've read it. Well, there's a doctor character, and Middlemarch is actually very funny, but there's a doctor character where there's this kind of evil character that everyone's trying to assassinate, but the doctor character accidentally kills him by trying to do the right thing. So I was kind of inspired by this idea of being a doctor, wanting to help people, and actually genuinely wanting to help people, but then finding yourself in some weird situation where you're being blamed and the opposite of your intentions. So I ended up just haunting the halls of the courthouse in Providence and I made friends with the clerk until he finally said, oh, there's a med-mal case coming up. So I sat in that for a year watching, see what happens. How do they
research?
Exactly. It's like talking to the doctor in the bathroom. We became friends, and so she told me a lot of what emotionally it was. She had great details because she was like this older lady, but then she also had a tragus piercing. So she told me how she'd have to take it out. First, she went, like every day I can't be myself because you can't have this kind of piercing.
Yeah.
So I wrote a whole novel on that premise. And so when I read it, I was like, for some reason, that wasn't the novel that I wanted to write. I don't know how to, it's similar to how I felt about Jason. It was like very competent novel. It had a beginning, middle, and end, but it wasn't right. So I went back to the drawing board, and then I came back with this other thing about, so the man, Jungmann's son Einstein is in this like sort of startup tech bro.
Yeah.
It's much more about the future of medicine, the Mall of America. Similarly, I actually went to these conferences where they're doing aesthetic vagina surgery, and got tons of ideas. But then that novel was when, it started to become ready to be published and so forth. But the 2016 election, so the novel was under contract in 2012, but I'm still working on it. It was also, when we submitted it, it was 850 pages.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Which is considered to be large, but I know there are a lot of male writers who write very large novels. But then, on the flip side, books are consumer products, and there are fewer books that you can fit in a box, and that is actually a consideration. There's some target number, like 282 pages, that's ideal for a book to pack it or something. But after the 2016 election, where I already, I'm Asian, I already know about anti-Asian violence, but just kind of seeing the resurgence of this between COVID and everything else. And then one of the very signal events that happened to me is, so I did grow up in a rural area in Minnesota where this book is set. Bob Dylan also grew up in my town and became disaffected and left our town as well.
Yeah.
But it was during the time when Trump was kind of bloviating a lot about let's nuke North Korea. And somebody in my town had posted on our town's Facebook group, they're very proudly, their bumper sticker that said, every day, 150 species of animal go extinct. North Koreans should be next. And then I just thought, my father has been the anesthesiologist in this small town for 40 years, which means he has laid hands on every single person in this town, anyone who's been born or had an operation or chainsaw accident. And to think that these people were calling for genocide just really made me realize this is how we are seen.
Yeah.
And so what was funny is I'd had those Jungmann pieces that you see now were written much more about filler, where Einstein's doing his tech bro stuff. But then, slowly, I think because I had this idea of when people see Jungmann, they just see this little Asian guy and they don't see everything that's made him who he is. So slowly those weird like filler things just start to ooze into it. And then finally I just told, at one point my publisher was like, well, if you do more of Jungmann, you have to have an Einstein piece. And then I found myself somewhat joylessly writing another Einstein piece. Again, it's this feeling. I was like, ugh, no, here I'm dutifully writing another piece. Then I finally told my agent, I said, you know what? This is Jungmann's story. It's just kind of coming out like this, despite the fact that, I don't know, my own ego, I wanted to write a big social novel, like Jonathan Franzen, medical, late stage capitalist novel. The immigrant novel is always something that easily gets pigeonholed.
You did all of it though. You did all of it. I mean, like everyone, like this novel covers so many of the, okay, so now I know I took 18 years. First of all, you did a lot of research. I mean, not only were you in a courtroom, you were sneaking into medical startup technology conferences. Like you were doing so much research, and I see how through time it evolved. And I'm personally, as a reader, I'm so glad you did talk about who Jungmann was, because it is such a powerful, so everyone learns about Dr. Jungmann Kwak, right? Yes. So I'm going to say that again. Everyone learns about Dr. Jungmann Kwak as this doctor living his regular life, dealing with the realities of hospital closures and all the problems in medicine, which are very relevant today. And then you learn about his story back in Korea and the war and what he and his family went through. And then raising his son, Einstein, who is a modern first generation Harvard-trained surgeon. We used to call them yuppies. I don't know what we call them anymore. And was so fascinated about your telling the story of first generation versus second generation. And then, because I'm really interested in hearing what you think your thoughts were about this. And then also showing the difference between Jungmann's way of raising, he and his wife's way of raising their kids versus the Kims, who very much incorporated their Korean heritage into their lives, whereas the Kwaks were like, no, we're American. And it just brought up for me this difference between assimilation and acculturation, and how immigrants have to straggle this what of their culture to keep, and how much are they having to step aside because of trauma and pain, or not just being beaten and harassed.
Exactly. And I think particularly for people of Jungmann's generation, there's so much unprocessed war trauma. And then they have the additional trauma of being immigrants and not understanding, cultural mores, and then also having to deal with racism. Korea is one of the most monocultural countries. So for instance, for my parents, I reference this a little bit. It's not the same story. My parents are older, but my father had to redo his internship in Birmingham during Jim Crow. So I think for him, that became the signal to think that, oh, wait, this is how Americans treat minorities. So we have to be as American as possible. This is the way we're going to be able to do that. And for me, my parents were fluent in English before they came. So we were not allowed to speak. It's not the same the way Myung-Ok does it with his little program and so forth. But there was this idea that the more white we could become, the better it would be. But then for us, particularly, if I can speak frankly, things like corporeal punishment, for instance, are taken very differently in Korea. In fact, I think there's like a saying that if you're like the neighbor and you don't beat the kid who is misbehaving, like you're not doing your duty to the neighborhood. There's sayings like that. But you also add to that unprocessed trauma, which can kind of manifest as what seems like an anxiety disorder or depression.
Right.
And then with no support, I mean, you just like, even just using my parents as an example, my mother had to flee over the DMZ when she was 14 because she was helping an aunt cross, and her family was supposed to come the next day, but they were never able to make it. So she never even said goodbye to her mother. So, but the whole time we were growing up, I wanted to learn about Korea, but she would completely shut down and wouldn't talk about it. And then, if I'd come home from school going, kids call me chink at school, like I'd be crying, and my parents would just say, well, you tell those ignorant kids you're American. I mean, they never said, tell them you're Asian American or tell them you're Korean American, be proud of being Korean. So these weird mixed messages as a child. And then also the idea that, well, in America, you're not supposed to hate your kids, but it's okay in other places. And then, and then the idea of when there's unpredictability for children, it's very hard to feel safe because when the parent is unpredictable. But I'm understanding my parents so much more now. A lot of it from researching this novel and talking to so many war survivors that you can't come out of something like that, like running across the DMZ and thinking you're going to get killed. And I think my mother was probably also sexually assaulted, but she won't talk about it. How do you like not talk about that your whole life, but there's no way that you can be unscathed by an experience like that. But then at the same time, there's no way as children that we also don't get some kind of like ricochet of that unprocessed trauma.
For sure. There's the residue and it's unspoken. We had a recent podcast for those who are interested about intergenerational trauma, like the spoken, the unspoken, the seen, the unseen. It can't not trickle down in some way. And as I was reading about Jungmann's growing up back in Korea during the war, it was well written and both easy to read, but hard to read in the sense of the way it's portrayed is like, these are things that just happen and you have to move on, right? So it was as you're reading it, you're like, oh my God, like the stuff that these people are enduring and yet needing to have the mentality of you just move on and survive, right? It's like, there's no time to think about it. There's no time to process it. You're just trying to survive. And then for him to come to this country and to have created and been as successful as he has, and then he's looking at his son. This is that other juxtaposition or that paradox as you look at your first generation kids and what they become, which is in some respects what you've wanted them to become. And then you're questioning, wait, but don't you have any connection to our culture and where we came from? And that's a tough one when you're being raised not to because of trauma and survival. And then you're sort of caught between these two worlds.
Right, exactly. And then for someone like Myung-Ok, Reggie is so spoiled, Reggie the grandson. But at one point, the other reason this book took so long is I felt like, because a lot of people, the Korean War is considered to be the forgotten war. Koreans have not forgotten it. But I also felt like every single detail that's in the book needs to be verifiable. That, for instance, there's a movie that I reference, The Great Escape. It had been played in Korea, like at that time and so forth. So there's imagination, but I felt like everything had to be verified. So at one point, I had to call someone up who's a very vague relative that I know lived in this area. And I said, during the evacuation, do people really walk barefoot all the way to Seoul? And he said, yeah, like, what else are you going to do? And he said, people had really tough feet back then. But you know what I mean? Like, conceptually, I just can't understand it. But at the same time, like, what else are you going to do? So the whole idea that you have this American military and they have all these warm clothes and they're all so cold. And then you have these Koreans who are so tough and just standing there in their little linen, and at the same time, when you're saying that, it's difficult to read, but at the same time, one of the things that I love about the book myself is that it's very funny.
Yes.
And that reflects the fact that Koreans are very funny. Like, no matter how dire something is, there's always a joke. Or if you ever watch a Korean zombie movie, like American zombie movies, so you know what I mean? American zombie movies are zombies, but Korean zombie movies, there's always a little slapstick. You gotta let the light in a little bit because
and let me clarify, because you're right. The book is incredibly easy to read. Being my empathic self, putting myself in the situation, like I would have to stop because I was just glossing through the story. I mean, I was like on the story and then having to stop and put myself in those shoes or those feet is like, oh my gosh, like how people do this and the strength of them when they both came, Jungmann and his wife, when they came to America and just kept persevering. It's astonishing. I mean, it's a tribute to the human spirit and survival. And yet, as you talk about, you can't do this without there being trauma and there being some fallout. I want to read a quote of yours, which was powerful. As our past and present American attitudes towards immigration have shown, countries and people have differing ways they receive their fellow humans in need. Children, we tell ourselves, are resilient. What we don't think about is that one's worldview becomes formed in this period, and early experiences, even if not understood, maybe if especially not fully understood, become part of things carried in adulthood that haunt a person every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Resiliency is something we mentally offload onto people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's great if people are resilient, but I agree. I feel like it's a little facile to just be like, well, they're kids. They won't remember it or grow out of it.
Yeah. No. You always remember it. And as we talk about a lot on this show, referencing the book, The Body Keeps the Score, like trauma's in us. You can't just muscle through it and forget about it. And your story teaches us that among other things. What do you want people to get out of this latest piece of art that you've created?
It seems really simplistic, but living in your city and just seeing, or just on TV, seeing the footage of elderly Asian Americans just getting murdered and beaten by strangers makes me feel like one of the very intentions of this is when you see a small Asian man, this person is a human being with huge story behind them.
Yeah.
And that's just simply, I do think that was something that really motivated me in terms of thinking about how do people see me, my family, how's my son going to grow up into this, being non-neurotypical and so forth. And I just hope that, I don't know, I like to think of myself as a rationalist, but I had the weirdest experience where I was walking down into a park in Harlem. It goes down these really large steps and it's kind of overgrown, kind of deserted. So a lot of people don't walk down these steps. The most I've ever found in there is like a dirty diaper. And I walk down and I reach down and I see this coin and I pick the coin up. And it is a Korean won from 1988. I've never found money or anything. And so I showed it to my friend who's very steeped in Korean culture. And he knows all this weird stuff. Because in fact, I don't know how I picked the name Myung-Ok, but he said if you read these oracle bones, it actually could mean like OBGYN in like this ancient Chinese script. So he took this coin and he said, oh, this is so clear because it's like pa is like 88 is like 8 is a very lucky number in Asian culture. So you have double luck. But he said also 88 is the time of the Olympics. And he's like, this is like a message to you from the ancestors that you're supposed to be speaking of all these things that have gone unspoken. He didn't know what my book was about. So I just kind of took it as this kind of transmission because I'm trying to also, people try to rationalize so much about how art is made, but then I'm realizing when I was a little kid, I started writing when I was 9, and I always thought, like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm not doing it the right way. And it wasn't until I got to college and read something by Flannery O'Connor, and it said she too, like didn't know what she was doing when she was writing. Or E.L. Doctorow talks about, it's like driving at night. You only see like a couple feet in front of you, but you just keep going. Then I realized, oh, actually, I always thought that people just typed out their novels, and I always thought I was doing it wrong. But so just being more open to the ideas of we don't know why, or sometimes I actually feel like, there are people who say like, well, I don't know, maybe some autistic kids can like read minds, and, instead of immediately going like, that's crazy, I just kind of try to think about, well, maybe there is like compensatory way that if they can communicate that, that they do things in different ways. Do you see what I'm saying? Like the rationalist mind is one thing,
right?
But no one knows how we create art because there's no AI that can do it yet. So
yes.
I try to leave it all open.
Let's hope it stays that way.
Right?
I just want to validate that literally when I thought about what is one of the main things I took away from your novel, and it really was how behind every person there is a story, and we have to put aside judgment and stereotype and just know no one knows the steps, the road that one has been on to get them in that moment in time, doing whatever behavior, acting whatever way they are. No one knows. And we just as humans need to be open to that understanding that everyone's showing up. Everyone's showing up the best they can.
Exactly. Jungmann is not the great parent at many times in this book.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of parent, it's time for the parent footprint moment question. Here we go. Tell us about a time that you became aware of yourself as an individual, as a parent, or even an awareness of your own parents, and that new awareness had a positive impact on your life, your family's life, or those you love.
So among other things, one of my friends who's into cannabis, but he's also a palliative physician, told me that when people have strokes, they often, when they're coming back from aphasia, not being able to speak, they can often do motor movements before that in order to communicate. And at the same time, I became interested in a therapy wherein children with autism who are non-speakers. I consider my son to be a non-speaker, that he says things, but they don't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
If I ask him a yes or no question, he'll say yes, and I ask him the same question, he'll say no. So he's not functionally communicating. But they learn how to point to letters on a board. And then I also read that book, The Reason I Jump, about the boy in Japan who learned how to kind of speak. And his mother did a similar thing that she came up with, this letter board. So I kind of used my journalism credentials to pretend a little bit. Well, it wasn't necessarily pretending, that I was interested in writing an article about this therapy, and could this person do a session, because she's very famous. There's only one person who really does this method. She was visiting New York, so we did get a session in with Jay, and it's a little controversial because sometimes the child needs support with her hand. And so people think that you could just be like, it's very controversial if they're actually like doing it voluntarily, even though there are children who can just point like without assistance. So we were like, but then I kind of felt like I really wanted to keep pursuing that. So we actually even took him to Texas, where this lady is located. We found a couple weird little glimmers where she asked him, is there someplace you would like to visit? And he actually wrote out the Grand Canyon. And it just seems so odd that he would use an article, because the fact that he's supposedly mentally retarded and he's doing like kindergarten level stuff and everything else that suggested that he doesn't know anything about language, and he wouldn't use an article. So that gave me a little glimmer, except the next couple days while we were there, he put his head through her wall and was completely violent the rest of the time. So we didn't get anything out of it. But so when we came back to New York, like whenever we could meet a different practitioner, we would usually try to book sessions, and they were often, our son's a lot better, but still traveling on the subway can be scary with him, or he still has a lot of outbursts. We're also finding out he has a lot of hearing issues. So we're slogging along. And then during the pandemic for the 2 years, because the school was so crappy, there's so little, like, how is he going to do occupational therapy on Zoom? And he doesn't even, I'm not sure his mirror neurons are working super great. So I'm not even sure what he's seeing like when he's looking at Zoom. So I did like a homeschooling every day of these lessons. In fact, I have like a seriously sheaf of lessons because I kept every lesson, and they're age appropriate. I don't know, did lessons like on mitochondria and things like that. And I've also gotten into a habit of reading to him at night, age appropriate stuff. So some of it's pretty, I don't know, it's a little awkward. There's sexual things, or I read in the book H is for Hawk, some nature books, but also some novels and memoirs. And I'm always not sure he's listening, or it's hard to tell from his face. But I just kept going. And then just the weirdest thing happened 2 weeks ago. We're not sure what happened. He started doing what's called open communication. So this therapy is mostly for academics. So it's sort of like you could do math with it, and you would sort of be like, I don't know, what's an organelle in the cell? The organelle in the cell, and then, they're supposed to kind of type out or point to the organelle of the cell. So it's a little bit mimetic, but it's supposed to lead to open communication. So our son suddenly started pointing. He said, "Move the board closer." That's really happening.
Wow.
And then suddenly, it's not completely. I can't say it's like he's suddenly like talking to us, but when he is calm enough, he is able to tell us certain things. Like he hears things no one else can hear. So when he's doing these sudden aggressions, he's like, he said he does not think it's characterized an aggression and so forth. So we're only a couple weeks into this. So we're trying not to overwhelm him by asking him a million questions. But he's asking who, what, why questions. He asked Dad, where did you hang out when you were a kid my age? I mean, he's asking completely like sort of typical questions, using articles. And then I finally, I'm trying not to put too much on him now, because the other thing he said is the reason he's having trouble starting to spell with me, he first did it with me. He said he's so afraid of hurting me because the emotional processing is so intense for him right now that he is calling it a self-stimulation. He's calling it a stim. He says when he stims, he actually has been like grabbing my face, punching me. He's very strong. So he said he's having trouble spelling because he's concentrating so hard on not stimming. So he's doing it more with his dad. But so I finally, in my desperation, I'm like, Jason, well, can you at least tell us like what has helped you the most? The transcranial magnetic stimulation, the cannabis. So, I have, as you can see, list of a million
you have
things.
lots to ask.
Exactly. But the crazy thing is, so he's eking out letter by letter, but he said, first he said, Mom, and what's weird is he calls me mommy verbally. He said, Mom, reading to me at night. He said that's how he's taught himself. That's how he knows how to spell. I'm not sure why, but he's Mom reading to me at night. And then I'm like, well, what? And then he said LOVE. He said and LOVE.
Wow.
So
love.
so for me,
Mom and love.
The epiphany for me was I thought I was a freaking terrible parent, for 20 years. And I've been apologizing to him because so many things I've gotten wrong. Like he actually wants us to stop his stims, where we've enrolled him in the Sunrise program where they encourage you to stim. Like I've guessed so many times, but he's so generous. And so for me, his generosity in this has made me feel like actually I'm a really good parent, or he's taught me how to parent. He literally taught me how to parent him. So what's kind of crazy, like he still has his enuresis. He's still wetting his bed. He's still stimming. He's still getting very violent. But it's amazing for me that when he can type out, no, I had this tantrum because a siren was going by and I can't hear. He's told me he wants us to take him to the doctor so he can get a hearing test.
That's incredible. It's incredible.
But that's how you parent. You don't expect You don't expect results. You can't, that's not what a parent is. You can't ever expect results or gratitude. That's not what a parent does. You just do what you do every day. But I have to say, I'm so enjoying being able to talk to him. Like, I cannot.
Oh my gosh. Such wisdom. Like,
And
there's
you
such
know what's
wisdom.
crazy?
Yeah.
He said he wants to be a writer. So everyone's like, what's your next book project? I have this whole thing I'm doing, but I'm going to set it aside because he has his own story, and finally let him tell it. Whatever
and
it
just
is.
it's in there, right? And he's starting to have you have helped him gain the tools and the vehicle to express all that's in there, to start to express. And I just, it's so powerful, Marie, like for the 2 words, and for everyone listening, particularly, we just are a few days away from Mother's Day just happening, for you to hear mom and love.
Yeah.
There's nothing, I mean, like, that's just, there's nothing more that can be said
Right.
to how
I was not exactly.
powerful
I was
that
waiting
is.
for him to say transcranial magnetic stimulation. He did say
Yeah.
that helped a lot later.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it was really, I don't
Yeah.
know. And just
Yeah.
that the child can be that forgiving for, do you know what I mean? For 20 years, he's not been, he's been telling me, is my cancer going to come back? To not even be able to express that this entire time. He's told me, like, people treat me like I'm an animal, that I only eat and I don't think. Like, to have to suffer through that for 20 years. I can't.
No,
I just, you know what
can't
I
even
mean?
imagine.
I get traumatized by thinking at 3 years old, they wanted us to relinquish him, basically, because they're like, you can't handle him. It's dangerous for you. This is autistic behavior. And at the same time, but because we had, the doctor, Dr. Gaetanas, you know what I mean? It's like we had the right people and the support.
And you kept trusting yourself, and you did not give up, and you did not listen to things that did not feel right. So I need to say, as we conclude here, your novel, The Evening Hero, to me, I'm calling you the hero.
I'm not a hero. I'm a mom.
Yes, I know. Well, I would say, like, moms are heroic. And for so many listening, I know how inspirational this is for moms and parents that are in the trenches. And again, parenting is hard these days, regardless. And then when we have neurodivergence and special needs, it adds multiple layers to that difficult parenting journey. So the next time we'll have to talk about your work-life balance, because I don't know how you do this parenting thing and how you write novels. It's wonderful. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And wishing you the best. And I know I don't have to say this, but keep speaking your truth, because I know you're going to.
I appreciate it. I feel like I learned so much just talking to you.
Oh, I learned so much. Tell everyone where they can find what you're writing, your new book, and everything else that you may be doing in the future.
Aha. And I will add, the project that I'm putting aside, but it is under contract, is my next young adult novel is called Hurt You. And it is a non-neurotypical retelling of Mice and Men. And it is Korean American centered. So I'm kind of taking the Steinbeck and putting it into the Korean after school tutoring pressure thing with a non-neurotypical sibling. Nice. And I have an easy website. It's marielee.net. I'm in all the social media stuff, including TikTok, where my handle is something like, it's Daily Writing Makes Book.
Daily Writing Makes Book.
Yeah, which is,
there it is.
Some kind of weird motto. And
I
will tell you Jason's motto, which is amazing. He's been kind of saying this, and I'm kind of like, oh, now I get what you're saying. He always says, say yes to life, which I always thought was a verbal stim, but now I realize when he can spell it, I said, what is this say yes to life? And he said, it is an MOTTO. It is his motto.
It's his motto. Wow.
I was like, how do you know what a motto
yes
is?
To life.
Right?
Say yes to life. Man.
There you are.
Jason is equally inspirational for us.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Marie. Wishing you the best, your family the best. And everyone, read this novel. It will make you think. It'll make you laugh. It will make you teary, and it will change the way you think about things in ways that we need to change the way we think about some things in our society today.
Oh, thank you for reading it so well. That's all I need is when someone reads it the way I meant it to be read. That's all I need. No more reviews for me. Great.
My pleasure. It was my pleasure. All right, everyone. Thank you for your reviews, your 5-star reviews, sharing this episode with everyone you think will benefit. So much was packed in today's show. Thank you for being a part of our community. And you know what I'm going to ask you to do. 2 things before we end. Try to be that person you want your child to become. And ask yourself the guiding question I ask myself every day. What footprint do you want to leave? This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Strummerman, composed and performed by Pro Tunes. Artwork is by Garrett Ross. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Parent Footprint Podcast and on Twitter at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, go to exactlyrightmedia.com. Listen, follow, and leave us a review on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, you can listen to new episodes 1 week early on Amazon Music, or early and ad-free, plus bonus episodes by subscribing to Wondery Plus in the Wondery app.